There's something about driving at night that unsettles the soul. The empty highways, the endless darkness, and the feeling that you're not as alone as you think. Some roads hold secrets, and some encounters stay with you forever. Tonight, I'll share with you 3 chilling true stories of night drives gone horribly wrong. So, buckle up, keep your eyes on the rearview mirror, and whatever you do, don't stop for anyone on the side of the road. The night was darker than usual, the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow even the headlights of passing cars. The highway stretched endlessly in both directions, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through forests that loomed like walls on either side. The occasional rustle of wind in the trees, and the faint hum of crickets were the only reminders of life in the emptiness surrounding the road. Daniel, a college student returning home after a late visit to a friend, gripped the steering wheel tighter than normal. He had always hated driving at night, and this particular stretch of road only amplified his unease. The silence inside the car felt suffocating, broken only by the low drone of the engine. His phone lay on the passenger seat, out of reach, but he dared not check it anyway. The thought of taking his eyes off the road, even for a moment, felt dangerous. The road had a reputation. Growing up, Daniel had heard whispers about accidents happening on this highway, about strange sightings and ghost stories traded between classmates. Most of it he had laughed off as nothing more than the exaggerations of kids trying to scare each other. Yet now, alone on the road with nothing but the void of night pressing against his windows, those stories echoed in the back of his mind. Each shadow cast by the trees seemed to twist into something unnatural, and every distant flicker of light in the rearview mirror made him glance nervously. He shook his head, trying to focus, telling himself he was just tired. The fuel gauge dipped slightly, reminding him that he still had another hour of driving before reaching the familiar glow of his hometown. He tried the radio to distract himself, but static was all he got. Turning it off again, he felt the silence sink back in, heavier than before. His eyelids threatened to grow heavy, but a sudden shiver jolted him awake. It wasn't the chill of the night air, but rather a creeping sense that something was wrong. He rolled the window down slightly, letting in the cool air, and focused on the dividing lines of the highway flashing rhythmically beneath his headlights. As the minutes passed, the emptiness of the road grew even more oppressive. He had not seen another car in at least 20 minutes, not a single pair of headlights ahead or behind. He tried to remind himself that it was just late, that most people were already home in bed, but the logic did little to ease the tightness in his chest. Out of habit, his eyes flicked to the right shoulder of the road, and that's when he noticed it. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but then the shape grew clearer. There, standing at the edge of the trees, just beyond the reach of his high beams, was a figure. A person unmoving, as though waiting. Daniel's pulse quickened as his headlights finally illuminated the figure more clearly. It was a young woman, standing perfectly still on the shoulder of the highway, her pale dress glowing faintly in the beam of his lights. She didn't raise her hand to signal for a ride, nor did she step away from the road. She simply stood there, her face partially hidden beneath long dark hair, her posture rigid and unnatural. For a split second, Daniel considered speeding past, keeping his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Every instinct screamed at him to keep going, to not get involved. But something in her stillness, the fragile outline of her frame, tugged at his conscience. Alone in the middle of the night, miles from the nearest town, she could be in danger. He eased his foot off the accelerator and let the car slow. His headlights washed over her completely now, and she slowly turned her head toward him. The sight made his stomach tighten. Her eyes looked hollow under the shadows, yet there was something pleading about the way she stared. He pulled onto the shoulder a few feet ahead, his tires crunching on gravel as the car rolled to a stop. For a moment, he debated locking the doors and driving off, but before he could act, the rear passenger door creaked open. The sound startled him. He hadn't even seen her move, but now she was sliding into the back seat, her dress whispering against the upholstery as she settled in. Daniel's throat felt dry as he glanced into the rearview mirror. She sat directly behind him, her gaze lowered, hands folded neatly in her lap. He forced himself to speak, his voice unsteady. "Are you all right? Do you need a ride somewhere?" She didn't answer. Her silence was suffocating, and though he waited, hoping she might say something, the only response was the faint sound of her breathing. He started driving again, the car rolling forward into the abyss of the night. The longer she remained quiet, the more unsettled he became. Daniel tried to reassure himself. Maybe she was in shock. Maybe something had happened to her. and she just needed time before she could explain. Yet the weight of her presence filled the car in a way that felt unnatural, as though she were more shadow than person. Every time he glanced into the mirror, his stomach twisted. Her head stayed bowed, her hair spilling over her face, and though her stillness was complete, he couldn't shake the sensation that she was watching him. Minutes stretched into eternity. The steady hum of the tires on asphalt, the darkness pressing at the windows, and the quiet form in the back seat all combined into a tension that made Daniel's chest ache. He cleared his throat again, forcing a small laugh to mask his unease. "Where are you headed?" His words hung in the air unanswered, vanishing into the silence. This time he thought he saw her lips move ever so slightly in the mirror, but no sound emerged. Instead, the cold seemed to thicken in the car, seeping into his bones, and he realized with a start that he had turned off the heater. Yet the air felt colder than the night outside. Daniel's grip on the steering wheel tightened, until his knuckles whitened. The silence in the car was unbearable, pressing in from every side. He could hear the faint hum of the engine, the rhythmic thump of tires on uneven patches of asphalt, and beneath it all, the sound of her shallow breathing from the back seat. He dared not look at her again, but the mirror tempted him every few seconds, pulling at his nerves like a string ready to snap. When he finally gave in and glanced up, she hadn't moved an inch. Her hands were still folded neatly in her lap, her head slightly bowed, strands of dark hair veiling her face. Yet something about her seemed wrong, as though her presence shifted subtly with each glance, as if the shape of her body didn't sit quite right against the fabric of the seat. He tried to distract himself, focusing on the road, telling himself that she was just a frightened girl who didn't know how to ask for help. Still, his heart refused to slow down. A faint, metallic scent drifted into the air, so subtle at first he thought it was his imagination. But it grew stronger, curling around his senses, sharp and unnatural. It smelled like rust, like iron, and the longer he inhaled it, the more it seemed to cling to the back of his throat. He stole another glance in the mirror, and for a split second thought, he saw a dark smear on her dress, just along the hemline near her hands. When he blinked, it was gone, replaced once again by pale fabric. Daniel swallowed hard and cleared his throat, desperate to break the heavy silence. "We'll be near town soon," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure her or himself. His voice sounded too loud in the small space of the car, bouncing off the windows and dashboard before fading into nothing. She didn't respond, didn't even shift in her seat, and that stillness gnawed at him more than words ever could. He wanted to turn up the radio again, anything to fill the emptiness, but the thought of static buzzing through the speakers only made him more uneasy. His eyes flicked back to the road, and that's when he realized how long it had been since he'd passed another car. The highway remained deserted, no headlights approaching from the opposite lane, no taillights disappearing into the distance ahead. It was as if the world had narrowed to just him, the girl, and the endless black ribbon stretching on forever. The thought chilled him more than the cold air inside the car. He pressed his foot slightly harder on the accelerator, his nerves urging him to get off this road as fast as possible. Then, without warning, a faint whisper brushed against his ear. He froze, every muscle in his body locking tight. It hadn't come from the radio, and it hadn't come from outside. The sound was close, impossibly close, as if it had been spoken from the back seat directly behind his head. Daniel's mind spiraled as the weight of the moment pressed down on him, every nerve in his body on edge. The car seemed smaller than it had ever been, the air thick and suffocating despite the steady hum of the vents. His eyes darted between the endless stretch of black road ahead and the mirror above him, where the pale figure in the back seat sat motionless. His heart pounded so violently he thought it might shake his chest apart. Each second that passed made it harder to separate his thoughts from his fear. The fog on the windows thickened until the world outside was nothing but blurred streaks of gray and black. He leaned forward, straining to see the faint glow of the road lines through the haze, but it felt as though the night itself was swallowing him whole. His hands trembled on the wheel, and no matter how much he blinked, the road appeared distorted, warped, as though bending under the weight of something unseen. He wanted to roll down the window for fresh air, but even the thought of lowering the barrier between himself and the outside darkness filled him with dread. He forced his gaze back to the mirror, unable to stop himself. This time her head was slightly tilted, her hair shifting just enough to reveal a sliver of her face. It wasn't right. Her skin looked too pale, too thin, almost translucent beneath the glow of the dashboard lights. Her lips parted slowly, and Daniel braced himself for words, but none came. Instead, the sound of breathing grew louder, heavy and ragged, filling the car until it felt as though the air itself vibrated with it. He pressed his foot harder on the accelerator, his panic urging him to outrun the suffocating presence that clung to him. The road seemed to stretch forever, mile after mile with no signs, no towns, no headlights from other cars. A sense of unreality settled over him, as if he had been swallowed into another world, where the highway was endless and escape impossible. His phone buzzed suddenly on the seat beside him, startling him so badly the car swerved. He grabbed it with one hand, desperate for the connection to something real, but when he glanced at the screen, his blood ran cold. There was no incoming call, no notification, only a black screen that reflected his own pale face back at him. And yet he could have sworn he had felt it vibrate. The metallic smell was unbearable now, saturating the air until it coated his tongue. He gagged, struggling to breathe, and when he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, he thought he saw a dark stain smear across his skin. He blinked, rubbed at it frantically, and it was gone, leaving only the clammy sweat of fear. His chest ached with every breath, and the silence in the back seat was worse than screaming. He tried to speak again, his voice breaking. "Please? What do you want from me?" The words dissolved into the void, swallowed before they could reach her, and the only reply was the faintest shift of movement in the darkness. Behind him, Daniel's thoughts raced faster than the car itself, each one more frantic than the last, each one pulling him deeper into panic. The endless stretch of asphalt ahead had begun to blur, as though the lines on the road were melting into the darkness. His breathing came in sharp bursts, every inhale scraping at his throat, every exhale loud in the tense silence. The figure in the back seat still had not spoken, but the air around her seemed charged, humming with a quiet energy that made his skin prickle. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his hands ached, trying to convince himself that this was real, that he hadn't fallen asleep behind the wheel and slipped into some nightmare. The smell of metal hung thick and heavy, a stench he couldn't escape no matter how much he tried to ignore it. It wasn't just a smell anymore, it clung to him, filled his lungs, seemed to seep into his very blood. He rubbed his face with one hand, his skin clammy with cold sweat, and forced himself to glance at the mirror again. She was staring at him now. Her hair had fallen away from her face, and though the dim light made it hard to see, her features appeared wrong, distorted, as if something had stretched them out of proportion. Her eyes were too dark, too wide, glistening like wet glass that reflected nothing back. For a moment, he thought he saw her lips move, forming a word he couldn't hear, and his chest tightened with terror. He slammed the radio knob with his hand, desperate for sound, for anything to drive away the suffocating silence. Static hissed from the speakers, loud and sharp, filling the car with its jagged noise. But beneath the static, Daniel thought he heard something else, a voice murmuring low and broken, tangled in the white noise like a hidden message. He leaned forward instinctively, straining to hear, but the moment he did, the static cut off entirely. Silence returned, deeper than before, and his skin crawled as the temperature inside the car seemed to plummet. The fog on the windows had thickened so much that he could barely see the road ahead. His headlights glowed faintly against the haze, swallowed almost immediately by the darkness. Panic welled inside him as he realized he couldn't tell if he was still on the right path. He squinted, leaning forward, but the lines were gone, the road stretching into an unbroken sheet of black. He blinked hard, his vision blurring, a wave of dizziness threatening to pull him under. His instincts screamed at him to stop the car, to get out, but the thought of leaving the safety of the vehicle and stepping into the suffocating void outside froze him in place. The whisper came again, clear this time, curling around his ear like cold breath. It spoke his name, slowly, deliberately, and the sound pierced him to the core. His stomach lurched as he realized it hadn't come from behind him this time, but from the empty passenger seat beside him. As though whatever had been sitting in the back was no longer there, Daniel's head snapped toward the passenger seat, his stomach twisting with a sickness that had nothing to do with motion. The seat was empty, the cracked leather untouched, yet the whisper still echoed in his ears as if it had only just been spoken. His eyes lingered on the empty space far too long, and when he pulled them back to the road, his heart stuttered in his chest. The headlights illuminated only a few feet ahead, but in that cone of pale light, the shape of the girl appeared, standing on the shoulder of the road, her body angled toward the car as if she had been waiting for him. He slammed the brakes and the tires screeched, the car fishtailing slightly before it steadied. But when he blinked, she was gone, swallowed by the fog and the black stretch of highway. His breaths came ragged and uneven, his body trembling as though his blood had frozen. He pressed the gas again, desperate to put distance between himself and the place where she had stood. His eyes flicked wildly to every corner, the mirrors, the windows, searching for any sign that she had returned. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every dark shape of the trees lining the road looked like it was leaning closer. He could feel her even when he couldn't see her, the way her presence clung to him like damp air after rain. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was inevitability, a gnawing certainty that no matter how fast he drove or how far he went, she would always be waiting somewhere ahead. The dashboard lights flickered suddenly, a faint pulse that sent panic flooding through him. He tapped the dials, but the speedometer needle jumped erratically, swinging back and forth as if mocking his frantic pace. The headlights dimmed for a split second, then flared again, and in that blink of darkness, he thought he saw her reflection in the windshield, seated beside him, her pale face inches from his. He jerked the wheel in terror, the car swerving onto the shoulder before he yanked it back into the lane, his chest hammering so violently it hurt. Sweat poured down his face, his shirt sticking to his back, but the night air inside the car was still bitter cold, each breath visible in short clouds. He tried speaking aloud, begging her to leave him alone, his words shaky, breaking apart in the middle, but they sounded weak, swallowed instantly by the oppressive silence. His voice no longer seemed to belong to him, as if the car itself muted every syllable. The road ahead stretched in a cruel loop, familiar signs flashing by as though he had been driving in circles. He recognized the leaning oak tree by the bend, the cracked billboard with its peeling paint, the pothole that jolted the wheel in the same violent way each time. The realization hit him hard. He wasn't escaping, he was trapped. The road was holding him, folding in on itself, and with each loop he drove, her presence grew heavier, her voice sharper, her shape clearer in the edge of his vision, waiting for him to finally look too long and see her fully. Daniel's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his body locked in place, every muscle tense with the effort of holding himself together. The realization that the road had folded into an endless loop gnawed at him, each turn confirming that he was driving in circles with no way out. His mind rebelled against the thought, trying to rationalize it as fatigue or stress, but his gut told him the truth. Something had him, something beyond his understanding, and the highway itself was part of it. His eyes burned from staring so hard at the road, but every time he blinked, the shadows seemed to shift, taking on human shapes that vanished when he looked again. The silence inside the car was unbearable, stretching so thin it threatened to shatter, and when it did, he knew it would destroy him. His hands shook as he reached for the radio, praying for noise, for any voice that wasn't his own. The dial sputtered, crackled, and then a low, warbling tone filled the speakers. It wasn't music, not even static. It sounded like distant chanting voices overlapping, whispering in a language he didn't recognize. He twisted the knob frantically, but the sound only grew louder, filling the car with a rhythm that made his skin crawl. The girl's reflection flickered in the passenger's side window, her lips moving in time with the chanting, though no sound came from her mouth. He slammed his fist against the dashboard, but the voices didn't stop. The only thing that broke them was the sudden roar of silence when the radio died completely, leaving him gasping in the suffocating stillness once more. He could feel the weight of eyes on him now, pressing against his skin like a physical touch. The rearview mirror called to him, daring him to look, but fear pinned his gaze to the road. The fog outside had grown impossibly thick, swallowing the trees, the signs, the stars. It felt as though the world had shrunk to nothing but his car and the few feet of road illuminated by his headlights. He knew she was there. He didn't need to see her to know. He could feel the cold radiating from the back seat, smell the metallic tang clinging to his lungs, hear the faintest scrape of fabric as though someone had shifted slightly in their seat. He whispered to himself over and over, "Just keep driving, just keep driving." But the words lost meaning, becoming nothing more than sounds in his mouth. Then, without warning, the fog broke, and in the distance, Daniel saw a light. His chest surged with desperate hope as he pressed harder on the gas. The glow grew stronger, burning through the dark like a beacon, and for the first time in what felt like hours, the crushing fear loosened its grip. His eyes widened as the light revealed itself, but his relief shattered instantly. It wasn't a gas station or another car. It was a single street lamp, standing crooked and rusted, its pale light pooling on the asphalt. And beneath it, waiting motionless in the glow, was the girl, her figure sharp and undeniable, her gaze fixed directly on him, as if she had known all along he would come back around. Daniel's grip on the steering wheel loosened for a fraction of a second as his eyes locked on the figure standing beneath the crooked street lamp. The girl's body looked still, almost too still, her arms hanging unnaturally at her sides, her hair draped over her face like a curtain. The lamp buzzed faintly above her, flickering as though it could barely hold itself together, and each time the light dimmed, her form seemed to distort, stretching taller or bending at odd angles before snapping back when the glow steadied. His chest heaved with shallow breaths, the pounding in his head loud enough to drown out the hum of the engine. He told himself not to stop, not to look too long, but the pull of her presence was magnetic, as if she were tethering him to that spot in the road. His foot hovered over the gas pedal, trembling, torn between speeding past her or slamming the brakes, and demanding an explanation for why she haunted him. The car slowed without him meaning to, his limbs no longer obeying him, as though the vehicle itself had fallen under her control. The street lamp's light spilled across the hood, painting everything in pale yellow, and for a heartbeat, Daniel could see her face clearly. It was smooth, too smooth, her skin waxy like porcelain, and her eyes were wide black pits, glistening but empty, swallowing the light rather than reflecting it. Her lips parted as if to speak, but what came out was a soundless vibration that rattled inside his skull, making his vision blur at the edges. He tore his gaze away and pressed the accelerator hard, the engine roaring in protest as the car surged forward. The figure vanished in an instant, not swept aside by the car, but simply blinking out of existence like a trick of the light. Relief surged through him for only a moment before he realized that the road ahead was no longer straight. The fog lifted slightly, revealing an intersection he didn't remember, its cracked asphalt branching off into three paths. No signs, no markings, only dark stretches that seemed to vanish into infinity. His pulse raced as he tried to decide which direction to take, but every choice felt wrong, as though whichever road he picked had already been chosen for him. He turned sharply to the left, tires squealing, hoping instinct would guide him to freedom. The fog thinned, revealing the landscape beyond the road, rows of trees, their bare limbs reaching upward like skeletal hands. The branches shifted in the wind, creaking, but as his headlights swept over them, he realized some of the shapes weren't trees at all. Figures stood among them, tall and thin, their bodies swaying gently, their heads angled toward him. They didn't move closer, but he could feel their attention like claws digging into his skin. His throat tightened as he forced himself to look back at the road, only to find the same crooked street lamp, glowing faintly in the distance, waiting for him with its lone circle of light, and beneath it stood the girl again, her silhouette sharper, clearer. As though each loop was pulling her closer to him, Daniel's mind throbbed with the weight of dread as he saw the crooked street lamp again, its dim glow staining the fog with a sickly yellow. His stomach twisted violently, a surge of nausea rising as the girl's form solidified beneath it, more defined than before, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her hair barely hiding the stark whiteness of her face. He gripped the wheel so tightly his nails dug into his palms, but even the sting of pain couldn't anchor him to reality. Every instinct screamed to flee, to turn back, but there was nowhere left to go. The road kept bending him toward her no matter what choice he made. The endless loops weren't just a trick of the landscape anymore. They were a trap, a snare woven around him with her as its center. The air inside the car grew colder, his breath puffing out in ragged clouds, and the faint hum of the engine sounded distant, muffled, as though the car itself were fading away. His heart hammered when he realized he could hear another sound layered beneath the quiet, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against glass. His eyes darted to the windows, scanning the darkened panes, and for a fraction of a second, he saw the outline of a hand pressed against the rear passenger side, pale and thin, vanishing the moment he blinked. He wanted to scream, but his voice failed him, caught somewhere between his chest and throat, leaving only a dry gasp. He pressed harder on the accelerator, though the sensation was like forcing his foot through water. The car responded sluggishly, as if fighting against him, the speedometer needle wavering uselessly before dipping to zero. He glanced down, panic swelling, and when his eyes flicked back up, his headlights caught the girl not at the street lamp, but directly in the middle of the road ahead. She was closer now, impossibly close, her form filling the glass of the windshield. Her mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, stretching into darkness that seemed to spill forward, reaching for him. He swerved violently, the tires screaming against the pavement, and for a second he thought he had avoided her. But the road beneath him buckled in the headlights, shifting like liquid, and the car jolted as though it had struck something unseen. His head snapped forward, vision swimming, but the vehicle kept moving, carried forward by momentum alone. The fog on the windshield thickened until he could see nothing at all, only the faint outline of his own reflection staring back. He rubbed furiously at the glass, desperate to clear it, and froze when the reflection didn't move with him. His double leaned closer from the other side of the glass, its mouth curling into a smile that wasn't his, its eyes black and depthless, mirroring the same void he had seen in the girl's face. The car shuddered violently, the engine cutting out with a guttural cough, and silence crashed down so suddenly that it felt like a blow. The headlights flickered once, twice before dying completely, plunging him into absolute darkness, and in that suffocating void he felt the unmistakable weight of something sitting in the passenger seat beside him. Daniel sat frozen in the driver's seat, his eyes straining to pierce the suffocating darkness that had swallowed the road, the trees, and even the sky. The silence pressed down like a physical weight, heavier than the car itself, broken only by the shallow rise and fall of his own breath. His hand hovered inches above the ignition, trembling, unsure if turning the key would even matter anymore. Slowly, unwillingly, his gaze shifted to the passenger seat. The outline of a figure had taken shape there, faint at first, but growing clearer with each heartbeat. The girl sat upright, her waxen skin glowing faintly in the dark, her head bent slightly toward him as if studying his every movement. He could feel her eyes on him before he saw them, bottomless pits of black that seemed to pull at his soul. He tried to speak, to demand answers, to scream, but no words came. The car smelled of metal and rot, the stench so thick it burned the back of his throat. The figure's head tilted slowly, unnaturally, until the sound of tendons straining filled the air. A faint whisper brushed against his ear, a single word drawn out in a breath that chilled his blood. Stay. The meaning sank into him like a blade. The loops, the fog, the road folding in on itself. This wasn't about escape. It was about keeping him here, binding him to this endless drive until he became another lost soul wandering the highway at night. The headlights burst to life without warning, searing white beams cutting through the dark. The road lay ahead again, endless and empty, but the figure beside him was gone. Relief flooded him, sharp and overwhelming, and for the first time he dared to believe he might be free. He pressed the accelerator and the car lurched forward, gaining speed. The fog peeled back like curtains, revealing more of the road than he had seen in hours. His chest loosened, his grip on the wheel steadied, and a shaky laugh spilled from his throat. But the sound died quickly as he noticed something strange. The scenery wasn't unfamiliar this time. He recognized the cracked billboard, the leaning oak, the crooked street lamp flickering in the distance. The girl stood beneath it, waiting. But this time she wasn't still. She stepped forward, one deliberate stride after another, until she stood in the middle of the road, her form stretched impossibly tall, her arms reaching out. Daniel slammed the brakes, tires screaming, but the world tilted violently as though the road itself had crumbled beneath him. His vision blurred, headlights spinning in wild arcs, and the last thing he saw before the world went black was her face pressed against the windshield, her empty eyes filling his entire view. When the car came to rest, there was no road, no forest, no fog. Only silence, endless and suffocating. The driver's seat was empty, the doors locked from the inside, and the crooked street lamp buzzed faintly in the distance, its glow falling over a motionless figure standing at the edge of the asphalt, waiting for the next traveler to come along. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this chilling story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying true horror tales. Your support means everything. It keeps me motivated to bring you the darkest, most unsettling stories from the shadows. Stay safe out there, and remember, sometimes the scariest things happen when you least expect them. Until next time, good night.